7:01. I'm going to hit the record button and we'll give everybody another 60 seconds or so, and then Ken can kick us off with an intro to remind us why we're here.
You're assuming he remembers.
Yeah, exactly.
Ken's a pretty sharp guy.
This is a test, Ken. This is a test.
I know. Have fun.
Oh, there's everybody. Wow.
Yeah.
Got a crew here this evening.
How many we got?
Well, let's see.
Is that you, Joanne? Your bird?
That's my bird. I don't know how to turn. I was looking for the delete the speaker.
Mute?
You mean mute you? Down to
No, don't mute her.
it's
It's nice.
the bottom or the top?
It's nice to listen to.
It's my clock.
Oh, it's a clock. I thought it was an actual
The
clock.
clock with pre-recorded.
All right. So that's 7 o'clock. So okay.
I don't know which one. It's like an Oreo or something or other. I don't know what it is. It's 7 o'clock. We had a different bird clock, and I knew all those birds, and then the clock died. So I got a new one, and I don't know these birds.
Did you see where apparently parrots are very sociable birds, and they started doing FaceTime with each other, and they're all going and having face meetings with other parrots, and
I missed that.
That'd probably make a good TikTok or a YouTube or.
yeah. Well, they were showing it, and the bird's up against the screen, squawking with another parrot.
So I assume they were imitating each other, right?
That's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
All righty. So anyhow, tonight we're together again to demonstrate to each other what great progress we have made in setting up our portfolio manager account and getting all our data in and analyzing it. So anybody who's done all that can raise their hand meeting because they don't need to be here. But the rest of us, we're going to hang around and learn what we should have learned last week, possibly. And Justin Kale of Energility is going to lead us through that. So, and yeah, I'll give a plug. Remember, it's Faith Communities Go Green is the sponsor here. And we thank you all for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks, Ken, for hosting the round table here. We'll pretend we're round in a circle and
Okay.
Getting everybody together. So last week we talked a little bit about benchmarking, and our company Energility does quite a bit of that with House of Worship as well as other businesses. And got a agenda here shared that just want to go through a couple things here in a few minutes. Just a recap from last week. We sent out an email with the information from last week, several of the links in there. And then also just a reminder that there's, training on demand. So, unless you want to get together next Wednesday, happy to do so. I'll make sure I prepare some dinner a little early, but, training on demand anytime you want to get it. This week, we're going to talk a little bit more about how to use it. So we'll just assume the answer to Ken's question earlier is yes, everybody's got it all shaped up, and we just got to figure out, hey, what do we do with this data? So what questions initially come to mind? I'm going to have, I got Molly Yeager, my business partner and our director of operations, and Zach Hadley, one of our energy analysts, on with us. I'm going to ask Zach to kind of catalog some questions. Are there questions that you're coming in here at 7 o'clock with that as we go through and unpack stuff, we'll certainly come across some more questions and some what ifs, but what questions do you have that we want to make sure we point out or answer? Go ahead, Ed.
Okay. Okay, if I can, I'll lower my hand. Okay. Okay, I didn't get through all the work that Ken said we should have gotten through, because actually had a congregational meeting on Sunday where I had to get approval to put 108 kilowatts of solar panels on our roof.
Nice.
So that'll get us up to about 90% generation by solar power. So that took precedence. However, I was able to go through a lot of this and looked up when I thank you so much for the information, Justin. I went and looked, okay, who has the green button, and DTE wasn't listed, but I went to the DTE site and they said, oh yeah, we got this and we can do this. And so that's good. A bigger question though is how much history here is actually useful or relevant? Because as I understand this, if I were to set this all up today, and let's say our score was 62, okay, just pull a number out of it, and then we didn't change anything, our score would remain about 62, or if we had a lot of sunlight, 63, or back. So how much history, and I'm only asking that because in the last even 4 years of the building, we've gone through COVID. So the use of the building has gone from, very crowded in 2019 to nobody there in 2021 or so. And so does that do a lot for me? So that's the first question, and how does that, and then the second question is, how do the changes show? For example, if I loaded in all my data and let's say I got a 62 score and each month it bangs around 62, 61, then we get all the new solar panels up, and then it will just with the new data coming in, will it jump to 75 or something like that, and then it will stay there for a while? Is that how I can expect to see this work? Okay, two high-level questions.
Yep. So the short answer to that is yes. There's a rolling review, and we'll actually get into that. So good questions, Steve.
I'm not sure this really matters, but it bugged me when I entered my property. It asked, what type of property was, and I said we had 2 buildings. They're both run off the same meter. There's just 1 meter for both buildings. And I entered what they were, but then the rest of the form that I filled out, it just kind of seemed to treat it all as one building, because it would ask for the date, the date of building, and I always use the date of the older building to do things. But I'm not sure it really mattered, but it just kind of bugged me when I was filling it out.
Okay. Actually, that's one of the first things we're going to get into. That's anybody else have questions, and then we'll start with Steve's question about the building data, because that's one of the first things we want to go through here.
I had a couple questions.
Okay.
About the timing of the bills. Sometimes Duke decides not to give us a bill, and then they give us a makeup bill, and so some of the periods are kind of irregular. It's not normal, but every now and then, and this happened to be last December, we didn't get a bill till January. So, I'm not quite sure how to handle that. And the other question I had was about solar and how solar generation should be treated.
Okay.
We've got a separate meter for it, but I'm trying to figure out how to extract the right info to put into that from our Duke bills, which are sometimes mysterious.
Sure.
Ken, consider yourself lucky. The last bill we've gotten from DTE was the reading of January 12th.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, well, Duke is usually pretty regular, but that would drive me nuts.
Yeah, that's one of those things that makes it really hard. You can have the data, but you have to have somewhat accurate data, and the more accurate data, the better output you're going to get, right? But at the same time, Energy Star does give you the ability to account for those estimates or those irregularities. Anything else? And then we'll dive in here.
Okay. Just a lot of Steve's questions go back to my question of how much of history is relevant, especially if the building was built in 1950 versus 1980 versus the year 2000.
Sure. So I'm gonna start going through the account here and do a little bit of kind of sorting through some of the nuances and details, and we'll actually be able to answer all of those questions. And Zach, if we could put a comment on there at the end about the what was the last part of your last one, Ed?
Oh, well, the energy,
How
the
much history?
building, how much, if the building was built like 1950, 1980, 2000, how much does that really impact everything? Because the date can tell you one thing, but was it well built in 1980 and shoddily built in 1990 or vice versa?
Sure. Yep. Yep. Actually, that we'll get into that. That's kind of dabbling in Portfolio Manager 103, but we can actually peek a little bit under the hood. I'll actually show you a little bit of the data, and it's kind of like one of those things. It's like, hey, how much do you want to see? Let me peek behind the curtain. Oh, might make your hair stand up, or the ones that I still have left.
Yeah.
So the profile, has the key things we talked about last week, where you got to set up a building in some location, and then the biggest elements then beyond that are getting data in. What is the building and what are all the characteristics, and then the energy piece. Those are the other two components. So one of the things to point out, and this may start to answer your question here, Steve, is I'm going to make this just a wee bit smaller so we can see the whole screen. So we got, kind of big picture, but it, goes and spans beyond one screen view. But we can go in here and make edits or make corrections. And this is really where, in your case, Steve, you have two buildings built in 2 different years.
Yes.
Okay. So one of my suggestions would be take out your second building, the building that was built second, and just set up your property with the one building, and then you can go in and add, because if they're all behind the same meter, the energy data is connected to, once you set up the meter and you say, hey, this is connected to the property. Let's see, when we're over here and we went through and we added a meter, I'm just gonna pretend that we're gonna add one here, and then we won't tell Craig this is actually his church right now. So we'll take it off.
I noticed.
But this is actually showing that this is connected to, and so when we create that meter, it wants to know that it's connected to that building. We're just going to say that it went into play here. Create that meter. So we got green, we're good. And now it wants to make sure that we know that all 7 of these meters represent this. So when you have your 1 meter and it's connected to the church, you're going to just have the one space type, the one space setup.
So you just put it in the area and descriptors for the both buildings together as merged?
No, you're just going to enter the first building, the first building's information.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go back and actually I'm going to cancel that so that we don't foul things up. But in here, then in the building use, you say, hey, I want to go in and either correct mistakes or update history or update with new information. So then you could go in here with new information and say, let's pretend your first building was about 13,852 square feet. You could say then, hey, we added 40,000 square feet on as of 1/1/1975. And once you add that in, you're not going to check temporary value, but then you go and save updates, and then it will update that square footage. The only reason that you would have to enter a different building use would be, let's say you had a church built, with worship space and such, that was 13,000 square feet. And let's say your second building you added was a 40,000 square foot gymnasium or a K-12 school, then you would want to add it as a separate space type.
And you would do that where you would just do that, go back to, you were up there and you said you would add it as, like, say, a gymnasium.
Yeah, so if this was Steve's original building,
Right.
13,000 square feet back in 1958,
Right.
and then he said, hey, wait a minute, we added a K-12 school.
Yep.
We're going to add that in here and go here.
Oh,
then
okay.
we're putting all the characteristics in for that.
Got it.
And then what will end up happening is, remember last time, one of those things that Energy Star does really well, they just went away, because when you change screens, it'll pop that up for a second while it's connecting the data. But Energy Star does a really good job of saying, hey, take a look at this. There's something red here. There's a exclamation point.
Mm-hmm.
What you'll end up finding out is you put that second building type in here, and you'll have 53,000 square feet. But then you'll look over here and you're like, wait a minute, the basic information's here. This doesn't line up. The two don't connect. And so then you'll have to go back in here and edit the square footage at the main level when you set up the property. And again, you can still keep, because the beginning of that property was built in 1943, conceivably, but then you're going to change your square footage here to 53,000 square feet.
And you'll change the total square footage, but Energy Star will continue to recognize that 13,000 square feet were a worship area, and 40,000 square feet were the gymnasium, and have all the benchmarks against an area similar to that.
Yep,
Good.
that's exactly right.
Good.
So those building details are in there, but you can make updates, and that was a fairly common thing that happened. And you'll notice that here with St. Albans,
Mm-hmm.
the building was built in 43, and they had the addition in 58, but their food prep area. So one thing, a few years ago, that became a new metric that houses of worship had to include. So before it didn't. And so you had to actually call out what your food preparation area was. And then also you'll notice that the hours open and the number of computers and stuff changed here as of 2020. So you can make updates where all of these dates don't have to line up. You may change occupancy or operations of the building, even though it's been standing for 50 or 75 years. You may add cooling to the building where it didn't have it before. And again, you can change it. And if you go, oops, I was going off the wrong data, I could go in and say, I want to correct mistakes, and go, hey, wait a minute, it really wasn't. And you can see here kind of some of the iterations of history before for the different categories. But you could say, oh, wait a minute, I didn't really mean 1943. I really meant, or I didn't really mean 2020. I really meant 2022. You can go in and change that, and it just catalogs your name here and the date you revised it. So that way, if you want to go back and audit that, let's say you have multiple people that are sharing an account, I'm sure you've never heard that before. You hand off the property booklet to the next person and the next person, and next thing you know, you're like, how the heck did we get a phone book here? But in this case, it tracks electronically all that those changes in there.
And how, okay, and how much of this is important to what you're doing today? Because all I'm seeing, let's say during COVID, I would imagine a lot of our facilities would have looked really great because they weren't being used. I mean, if the facility was shut down, so you would have had a great score because you had this building that was supposedly at 100% occupancy, blah, 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 blah. And so you just expect to see a spike in your score during that period if you look at historical data, and then it will come down and you'll know that's why it is, correct?
Yep. So,
Okay.
so that's one of the things that in order to really do anything with the property, we have to get into the energy data, and we made sure we have meters. We made sure we have data. And again, another thing they do a really good job of is giving you a chance to look at the bigger picture, and then you can click on certain things like a particular data point to say, hey, wait a minute, why did we have a gap here? Well, November 18 through April 21. Well, is that important? Well, the reality is the farther you move down the road, kind of like what you were asking earlier, Ed, the farther you move down the road, it's only important if you're saying, hey, during that time period between July of 2018 and April of 2021, I want to use some period in there as my measurement period, because in this particular case, we didn't have electricity in here, and we only had electricity starting in April of 20. Okay, so you would, I'm going to unpack that a little bit more here in a second, but basically you can set some of those parameters. And that's actually one of the first places I wanted to start, was going through the summary. You can start looking at things like, remember we talked last time about source and site EUI between the utility or versus what's happening on the site. Any of these highlighted things you can go and remember, find our glossary. But we want to click here on our pencil because maybe we don't always want to log in and see source EUI. We don't care what conceptually what's happening at the utility level, but we want to see our, Ed, you were talking about our Energy Star score. So we want to see that. This is something that when you start doing some manipulation beyond the defaults, Energy Star is going to take a little time to crunch the numbers.
Right.
And so that's kind of the big picture look. And what's that one, if you said, hey, Energy Star score is our most important metric that we want to keep an eye on, that's probably the metric you want right here on the front page, so to speak. And then I'm going to zoom in this. I'm going to zoom out for just a second. There's a lot of smaller subsets here. I'm going to go over those here in just a second. But for talking about metrics, we can get into these metrics here: Energy Star score, source, site EUI, the energy use intensity, the cost, the greenhouse gas impact. In this particular case, they're not using water or waste. But then we can also start defining, and this gets into your question, Ed, we can start defining what's the date we want to use. Is that the date, that we said, hey, we formed our green team in, June of 2017. Boom, that's our date that we want to use as our baseline, and everything we want to track going forward is based on that starting point of getting everybody to come together. Or you may want to say, I always want to look at the last 12 months before the previous year.
Okay, and it just, in your experience, what are the most intelligible metrics, readily intelligible by, let's say, a congregation? You're going to go announce to them something about how you've improved or stay steady, or what's the easiest one to use that everyone will say, oh, okay, I understand that. It's
I personally feel like energy. So there's a couple of stats that are fairly well known. Is most people, when you talk about Energy Star, they're going to say, it's kind of like I have a colleague that used to sell Aflac insurance, and he's like, every time I talk to somebody about Aflac, they're like, the only thing I know is it's insurance and it's a duck, right?
Yeah.
So not much more. But Energy Star, they know, hey, it's blue label, and it means something about energy efficiency, sustainability, something positive.
Okay.
So we tend to focus on getting people to kind of use that as kind of the center point.
Okay.
It's also easy to understand when you're like, hey, it's 1 to 100. If I'm a 5, got a lot of opportunity.
Yep.
If I'm a 95, doing really well. And it's percentile based, right? So it's not it is a fairly complicated score accounting for environmental impacts, but it's simple in so much as, hey, if I'm 50 today and I'm tracking my progress and I'm 75 in 2 years, that's a pretty big deal. I've jumped 25% compared to other churches of my similar characteristic.
And on that, is it safe to say, since this is a benchmarking and I'm using that just generalized score,
Mhm.
that if I'm at 60, that would mean we out of 100 churches or houses of worship, 40 are better than us and 60 are worse, or that we're at 60 where we could get to 100.
Yeah, the opposites. You're doing better than 60% of similar houses of
Okay.
worship. And so that's where it gets down to the details, right? And I'm going to unpack the data set behind the Energy Star here a little bit later, because it's a little convoluted, but I do want to share, hey, here's where it comes from and here's what it is. But the short answer is, you're compared to other similar congregations. I know you're in Ann Arbor, Ed. So in that climate zone that spans Michigan and Northern Ohio and Minneapolis over to the New York area, you're compared to other congregations. How big? What square footage and approximate seating capacity?
We've got 36,000 square feet.
Okay,
And
so
Justin?
yeah, so when you look at worship facilities, these metrics here are the ones that they're saying, hey, this is what a house of worship looks like for Ed, and then here's what the other data set, the mega church in Miami, the little rural church in Minnesota, the other churches in other climate zones. And if you look, there's a star next to these, and that star, you'll notice down here at the bottom, is a detail that's used to calculate that score.
Okay.
So is computers important? Yes, you have to have it so that they can tell you're not running a data center. But statistically speaking, the things that are driving houses of worship energy is if you and I and Steve and Ken and Joanne all had similar congregations, but one of us had a whole bunch of computers, or we had no cooking facilities, there's going to be a little variation. But if I have 5,000 square feet and running a big commercial kitchen, and Ken's able to feed 5,000 from his 300 square foot facility, that's going to be a difference, right, in expected energy.
Yeah.
And so these ones with stars are the ones that actually really have a significant impact.
Okay.
That if you said, hey, all statistics here, all characteristics are the same, but I'm at 50,000 square feet versus 13,000 square feet, my scoring is going to be different, because you're expecting I have a bigger building, you're expecting I have a certain energy intensity. And that's really how the score system works. Again, we'll go into the data set here in a little bit.
Why are there two scores at the top, a current and a baseline?
Yeah, good question, Joanne. So if we look back here on this summary, when we look at the metrics, baseline is something you can establish, and it does not have to be the one that's in this summary. You can see here in June of 2017, their score was a 46, but their baseline score here is 41. So if we go in here, and we can go in either and change metrics here, we can go in here, we can go in over here. The one thing I want to caution you about, and then we'll look at the number, is when we go into metrics, you'll notice down at the bottom, it says 7 of 7. Well, those are the ones that were down the left side of that chart. If you get into it, be careful what you wish for. You can get into, hey, we want energy performance metrics. Which one of 25 or 30 do you want? We want greenhouse gas emissions. Which one do you want? So there's lots of details that you can apply, but these are the ones that are by default, and they're the ones that hit environmental impact, external, at the site, cost, etc. But you can go in here and change the date, and this kind of is going to answer your question, Joanne, but then also, Ed, when we were talking about relevancy, you can say, hey, I want the year ending in 2021 because I know that was a we'll call that a COVID impact year. And we want to save that. And we want to compare that to our current. Well, guess what?
Yeah.
During that time period, they were listed as an 84. They were at an Energy Star score of an 84.
Right.
And currently they're at a 50. I can tell you based on, Craig's impact and work there, they do a really good job of doing what they can do with a building that was built, going on 100 years ago. But we can see, to your point, Ed, that there's probably something to that, the Energy Star score there. So
Right.
that's where some of the let's look at. That's where going in and looking at this and going, okay, if we're looking at the end of 21, so we're looking at December here, we can just see visually, they have all the electric bills back here, but they're missing a gas bill here. And Energy Star is always looking, and Joanne, this is to answer your question, they're always looking at whatever your current 12 months past is. And then whatever the baseline is, you can determine. So if we go back in here and change this other period, they're going to give us a recommended baseline. Part of that recommended baseline is Energy Star's score is really only accurate if you have 12 contiguous months of data. So when we showed that their church had 84 here, June of 21, it would go all the way back to July of 20. And if we look at the energy data, in July of 20, they had electric, but they didn't have, remember they have this big gap in their gas bill here. So really that's not a good 12-month measurement period because they're missing some of the data. So Energy Star by default is going to say, hey, here's a data set that we would expect you to use. Right. So if we plug that in and said, here's their baseline, they're at a 41 back in December of 2016, and they're at 50 now. So the other part that is a little cloudy here is we see from January of 23 all the way back to January of 18, we don't see the full data of all data that you have in the portfolio manager. This is just a window into the data that you've updated. So again, I think you asked that question last week, Ed, hey, how many years back should we go? And it really goes to, again, I'll follow up my Energy Star statement from a few minutes ago with putting enough data in where you can say, hey, we got a green team going, or we started making commitments, let's call it, January of 2022, you probably want anywhere from 2 to 3 years of data before your commitment started. Right. So you can see, hey, here's how, when it was running on autopilot, this is what it looked like in terms of data. So the other thing that I'm going to point out, I was going to talk about this a little bit later, but I will share this with you now since we're here on the energy page, but you'll see a couple of these little Excel links. Those are not only in right here in the main summary tab, you can download your property data. And then also, and you'll notice our friends at Energy Star are still crunching the numbers to get us what we need. But you can export the energy data out. And so the first link that we clicked on was the building data. And this is one of those things that really Excel is the limit. So if you have knowledge about how to use Excel, how to manipulate Excel, or you just simply want to keep an Excel database of this information so that you have it accessible and you don't have to get online and go into Portfolio Manager, you're welcome to do that. But you will see, can everybody see my Excel sheet there?
Yep.
So you can see this has got the basic data, occupancy, the square footage, it's one building, And so that would give us the data that we entered into Portfolio Manager. And then again, energy data is energy data. We'll go through a few things that Portfolio Manager will let you do. But you can see here when we exported the data, there were several months that they did not have that data available. So
you have to go back and manually input that, correct? If
yeah,
you
so
got the
those
bills.
would be a good indication. Like if you, for example, again, we know with houses of worship, you transition things from time to time.
Mhm.
If you're getting the Portfolio Manager account from someone else and you see that there's no data there, it's probably because, like Ken said, you got, a gap where the bill wasn't sent, and then all of a sudden, June happens and you forgot to enter 4 months worth of data, and you're moving on, you hand it off. The other thing that you can also do is if you go in here into the main summary page, you can run here for a check for possible errors. And if you have an error in your data, it's not going to tell you have a gap in your data, because you can see that visually on your graphic there. But let's just say, hey, before I hand this off to Ed, I'm going to run this checker. Well, it's got no waste material or water meters. So at this point, that's the only error in their data. But it's kind of like one of those things, you don't know what you don't know unless you visually went in and looked at the graphic. You wouldn't know that, or you got that report and you're like, hey, we're an Energy Star score of 84. Let's get recognized. Let's unpack the details. Well, you know what? Actually, that's something you can do also. Let's look at if we said, hey, getting to 75, getting to Energy Star rating is certification is one of our goals. This goals tab is a really good one to be able to, this will default show you a target of 75 or a median right down the middle. Hey, there's a bunch that can catch up to us that we can show them how to do it. And then there's a bunch that we got to learn from, right? So it will automatically calculate these values for you based on your congregation. I want to point out, remember that these two are 45 and 71. Okay. The second value. So if we would go back in here for a second to our, let's go to Christ Kettering, our friends over in Dayton. And if we go in here to goals, we're going to see that the targets and median property are 61 and 97. Well, guess what? Those have shifted because, and Ed Probst does a really good job of keeping up their program. This is what his building looks like, where they have the worship facility, and then they have another space that's used for daycare. But he's got almost 90,000 square, or over 90,000 square feet compared to Craig's 13,000. So the targets are different, and it automatically calculates those for you in the goals tab. What it does allow you to do is then use your baseline or whatever reporting period you want to start accounting for, and say, hey, we've got this target. We know how to get to 75. We'll use Ed as an example. In December of 17, they're at 53. They've been making some progress little by little. And here, as of the end of the first quarter, they're to 59. This gives them targets to be able to say, if we want to get to a 75, this is the energy use intensity that we have to use. Now, BTUs doesn't mean much to most of us, right? So one of the things that's helpful, that's by default in Energy Star, is they have this set of reports here, and their statement of energy performance. You can actually select different time periods. So you may say, I want to use my baseline year and see what was my energy performance then. I'm going to skip for just a second in downloading all those, because it's really a matter of point and click there. But Energy Star has a page that gives you an example of all of those reports. So if we look at statement of energy performance. This is what it looks like. It's going to tell you in big, and this is like right in your face, Ed. This is, we're 77. This is what our score is. And then it's going to start giving you all the details. This statement of energy performance, when you get to 75, that's a document that has to be signed by a licensed professional, a professional engineer, registered architect, et cetera. And so these different reports are ones that are either used for certifying. It could be, hey, we want something simple to share to the congregation, so we were going to run a scorecard.
Hey, Justin.
Yeah.
Quick question. Can you set a date range for these? Like, could you run one for, say, 2020, one for 2021, and that would give you scores for different years and show you how you're doing?
So let's go, we're going to pick on our friend Ed since he's not here. And let's just say we wanted to run an Energy Star scorecard for, we want to use a single year and we want it to end on, just because it's nice, neat and tidy for December 31st. Let's go back. I'm gonna roll some dice because I know Ed's been in our program for a while, so we got some data in there. So there's ending year 2016. Okay. Oh, my pop-up blocker's telling me that I'm. Oh. I'm going to let pop-ups show up here. So let me download this report again. So there, in December of 2016, Ed's church was, our friend Ed Probst was 50 out of 100. So again, this is a very simple visual that you could share with folks on a monthly basis. Or, hey.
Justin, the one you just had, somebody needs to sign if it's over 75, what would that be for?
So the, go back to here. The statement of energy performance.
Right.
So I'll answer that here in just a second. So Steve, so then if Ed showed his congregation at the end of 22, boom, here they're a 60. Again, very simple visual representation. So the statement of energy performance, I'm going to go back a screen. So we were right here. So statement of energy performance is slightly different. Let's do that single year. We'll do his one ending in December of 2022. So he's a 60. So you have to be greater than 75 in order to be certified as Energy Star.
Okay, and being that is just public recognition that you are that good, and you have to have somebody sign off on it.
Correct. And so at a 60, you wouldn't be eligible to get that. You can still use the report.
Right.
The difference between that other simple scorecard is this one has very specific data. So how do you compare to the national median? What is your emissions? You know, what is your actual, again, it takes your gas and electric, converts it to BTUs. So for probably 95% of your congregation, they're going to look at that and go, interesting. What's 60 mean?
Yeah.
Right. So this is again, the document that has to be used to sign off. The other thing that is, let's see, this verification checklist is again something that's a little bit more in the weeds. But if you're signing off to say you're 75, it's not just, hey, great, engineer came in, Art Chunko said we're a 75, you're signed off. Well, the professional engineer has to actually go through and do some data verification of, hey, this is how big it is. This is the current location. Yep. Oh, I use the simple statement, if you turn off all the ventilation and all the lights, pretty much every building's Energy Star rated. So you actually have to verify that the building's operating the way it's designed or supposed to be operated, with proper ventilation, proper lighting. And hey, is it 105 hours? Is it 400 seating capacity? What are those characteristics that we had to input at the very beginning? This check sheet does that. Now, again, that could be something your congregation could use when you're handing it off from one person to the next. Hey, go in and check it, or they can just go into the portfolio manager and account for that.
And since this is a benchmarking exercise,
Mhm.
how do they account for the migration of the underlying data, in that let's say there are 100 houses of worship in our area, the same size and all that. And we are right now, we go in and we're ranked at 50, okay? Half of them are above us, half of them are below us. Well, if everyone is improving over that time, even if we improved a bit, there might be some more congregations that are improving a whole lot. So we could be improving, but our score could be falling.
Yes, exactly.
Because everyone else is running faster than we are.
Yes. So the thing to remember is this is a static data set that you're being compared to. Again, like I said, mega church in Minneapolis, rural church in Minnesota, different sizes, different climate zones.
Right.
Your data is your data. But Christ Kettering, Columbus Mennonite, St. Albans, Tifereth Israel, they're not being compared to one another. They're basically, there's a statement that, you can be competitive against your peers, but you can also be competitive against yourself, right? One of your, targets is, how do I do better than I did yesterday? So the last thing, and I'm going to fully answer your question, Ed, here in just a second, we're going to pull the lid off of this data. The last thing I wanted to point out to you is these reporting, the reports are there. You can get into some weeds with design where you're saying, hey, I know what a 75 and what a 50 looks like, but what if I said, hey, I'm going to have this same size building, but what if Energility came in and did an audit and they said I was only going to use 15,000 CCF in gas? And what if they said I was only going to use 190,000 kilowatt hours? And what if they said I was going to actually take my solar system was going to be 400,000? I still want to try to get to 75, but I've essentially designed a potential goal. And now I can see, hey, wait a minute, if my new usage after my improvements is those values, again, not real granular detail, just what's the forecasted savings. Now I can say, here's my target. So now, Ed, you could go to your congregation and go, hey, we added these solar panels, and now we're expecting we're going to go from 65 to 72 or whatever that number is. But this is a way that you can start looking at a little bit bigger picture and say, hey, well, let's design what we think our improvements look like. This doesn't give you calculations for HVAC or lighting. It assumes you're plugging in the outputs of a study of that sort.
Okay.
So I have two questions then. So if you are going through, if you're a house of worship and you're going through this exercise, because you're going to apply for a grant for energy efficiency improvements, and they ask for the EPA portfolio manager. So you showed us several different scoring, the tools or methods, or, there's the simple scorecard that you could control your current congregation. What scorecard do you show a funding organization? And then the second part of that question, which I hadn't thought about until Edward asked a very good question, was, so then if you are going to you're applying for these upgrades, do you want to then say, if I am able to get these upgrades through my grant request, here's what the difference would be? Is that something that would strengthen your application?
Yeah, so that's a really good set of questions, Joanne. So one of the things that I would say, applying for a grant, this statement of energy performance, and I'm just going to we're just going to say we're going to use that one.
Okay.
I would say this statement of energy performance does a couple of things for you. One, it shows big picture, here's where you're at. It also shows some of the granular detail, because you know as well as I do, when sometimes folks are evaluating, they're like, what does that number mean? But the other person evaluating may be a numbers person that is looking at quantitatively. So this is something that boils down, you know, electric and gas, and says, hey, common denominator, here's what that site and source is, and here's how you compare to the median. It gives a little bit more detail. I
Okay.
could also see, you're exactly right. I could also see the, let's Columbus Amendment here, using that statement of, using this design and going in and saying, hey, here's the design project that we want to use. We're just going to say, hey, they're going to get. Oh. There's another thing with it. So if you go into the edit the design, if you take your building, if your building characteristics are not the same, it doesn't like that. So here, this is then able to essentially tell that story for you, Joanne, is, hey, the folks in the middle of the road look like this. Here's where we're trying to get to, and here's where we currently are in use. And then if we do the things that we're requesting the grant for, you know, engineering company has given me a study that says I'm going to reduce energy, or I'm going to get solar. Here's what my outcome is expected to be. That this could be the, and this is what they call statement of design intent. So you could actually print that where it says, hey, based on design, we're expecting an 86. Here's what our new design energy is. Here's our characteristics. Here's how it compares to the median, and then a few check boxes to see, you know, who's all involved in the project. This statement of design intent is not something I see utilized very commonly, but in your particular case, that could be where you had, you know, let's say you hired somebody to come in and do a study, you could have them sign off and say, hey, this data is real. This is our actual validated calculations and modeling.
That would be somebody who does an energy audit, or would it be somebody more like in construction that signs off?
It's usually Energy Star's two preferred credentials are professional engineer, registered architect. Those are the credentialed, and actually, let me just pop that up again. It actually tells you, they call it a verifying professional. Now,
one was a professional engineer and the other was a what architect?
Registered architect.
Registered.
Yeah. So in a design situation, usually you have an architect and you have a general contractor or developer. So if you're, you know, in that situation, you could have both of them sign this. But if you're actually going the next step and saying, hey, we did the work, we want to get Energy Star rated, professional engineer or the registered architect are the two credentials for that. And the last thing, did I answer your question fully, Joanne?
Yeah, that's excellent.
Okay.
Thank you.
The last thing I want to say, and then we got a couple minutes left. I'm going to unpack the data that we've been talking about here with Ed. I'm not going to go into detail on sharing, reporting, and recognition, primarily because those have more to do with if you have a larger portfolio, you're working with a group of folks, you can get into that. What I will say, this sharing part, this is because we have a lot of clients in here on. We got it. There we go. On the front page or the summary tab, where we were talking about metrics and we ran this error checker, this tells you right here who has access to your portfolio. So when you set it up, it's just you. It's you and the four walls and your computer. You're in it alone, right? And if you want to share your data, there's ways that you can do that. And I will say that's kind of getting into Portfolio Manager 103. And I'm actually happy to take anybody's phone call, primarily because I'm going to redirect them to Molly, because she does a really good job of walking people through. It is not an intuitive, hey, I want to share my portfolio or my project with Ed. Wait a minute, I got to share something and then I got to do something and I got to click on their link. You got to do a little back and forth. Molly's really good at governing and navigating that process. But once you do that, and frankly, I would open that up to any of you all if you want to share them with our account, which is listed as justin.kale in the Energy Star database. I would be happy to take a share from your portfolio and we could work through some of those, nuances of updating data or entering in the profiles. The last thing I want to share here is the question that Ed has brought up that will answer several things related to the data. There's a survey that's called Commercial Buildings Energy Consumption Survey, sometimes called CBEX. This is from what's called the Energy Information Administration, and I could sit here and talk to you for hours about it.
That's okay.
I can tell you, I appreciate that comment, because I can tell you, even though I could talk about it forever, there's about this much of it that I've really skimmed the surface of. The EIA, simply put, has data on every type of fuel source, every type of trend, building characteristic. It is actually, and I was fortunate enough one of the years when I was in facilities, they literally go around every 5 to 7 years and survey a sample set. And that's why certain data, certain building types like houses of worship and office buildings can be scored because they have statistically relevant data, but they actually go to the building owners and say, how many chillers do you have? What's your square footage? How much, kitchen prep area? What's your seating capacity? All of those things. And there are hundreds of characteristics that you can download Excel files with just table after table after table at such a granular level. And what they do is get into sorting it out, climate zone and floor space, energy types, building floor space. Is it ownership occupied? Is it government, non-government, size and age? What I will tell you to summarize, appreciating Steve's comment that he doesn't want me to talk about it for hours, is when you're entering your data, accuracy is important. And we talked last time about you might get square footage off the auditor, off of building drawings, or you might measure it, and you might have 13,000, you might have 13,100, you might have 12,999. Which of those numbers is right? The reality is you're compared to a big, big, big data set, and that data set chunks those into groupings. So your 13,000 plus or minus a couple feet may be scored in a category of building square footage that's from 10,000 to 15,000 or 12,500 to 14,000. It really is putting the big stack of data into tiers and buckets. So when you're saying my building is X amount of square feet, number of occupants, percentage heated and cooled, built in 1962, you're getting a comparison within a data band that might be 1960 to 1969 or 65 to 69. So it's breaking the big data set down into smaller groupings. And then they have a statistical method that says, hey, you use this much energy for these characteristics. You use this much energy. You're using less energy for the same characteristics. Your score is 70 and theirs is 25, for example. So what I would tell you, Ed, is if you go to this EIA, the 2018 data is the most recent data that's available.
Yep.
I will make sure in our follow-up link, I put a link to it. Energy Star tracks every building type. What's the data set that you compare to? Because every 5 to 7 years, when they go get the data from the survey, they actually do a rigorous quality check, which is why the 2018 data is just going to be coming online here later in 2023. It actually takes, they'll be doing the next CBEC survey in this year, next year, based on funding, after they've gone through and scrutinized the last one for the last 5 years. So that's why there's really a high degree of utilization of Energy Star score, because the data set is robust and it's credible. They do a lot of cleaning of that data. And that's why the score can fluctuate from time to time as you're looking at your rolling 12 months. Your usage may be changing. Your data set's still the same that you're compared to, but when they make a big data set update, well, guess what? They're putting the most recent last 5 years. There's new churches going online, new schools going online, new fill in the blank. And so now those newer buildings are now in the bigger data set. And in 2012, I'll share one last anecdotal experience. In 2012, there was a big update because the data set was 2003 was the baseline. Almost every congregation's Energy Star score dropped by 5 to 10 points. That was actually the year that they said, hey, you have to start updating for square footage of food prep space. We've realized statistically that's a significant data point to be able to keep. And so we had some congregations that went, God bless them, Athens First Presbyterian worked for 6 years, 5 or 6 years, to get from 30 something to 75. And like within 6 months, we had just ranked them and Craig certified them at 75. Within 6 months, they actually dropped down into the 60s again because they were compared to a newer data set. And some congregations, once we trued up that food prep area, their score bumped back up a couple of points because it was updated. So hopefully that answers a little bit more of your question, Ed.
Yeah,
from the beginning
that
about
does.
the rolling data set.
Yeah,
and
that's
the
good.
background.
Thank you.
I'm just kind of skimming through our questions that we had from
You've
early
got to
on.
keep running to stay where you are.
Yes, exactly. And fortunately, they give you 5 to 7 years before the trends update.
So do they publish that so you can hand over this project to somebody else? And then, of course, the complete failure will be on the person you handed the project to when the score crashes.
Yeah, that like I said, I'll include the link in there, but in Energy Star Portfolio Manager, they actually tell you what's the most recent CBEX data set.
Okay.
And for example, like multifamily housing, it's a totally different scoring database because the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and such have robust data that the EIA doesn't have. So.
And what's that little box up in the top? You say not currently eligible for Energy Star certification. And it looks like they did 75 in 2020, 84 in 2021, 80. Yep. And why aren't they? Because for this year, why wouldn't they?
Good question. So this is again on the front page of their thing. Right. So if I click on it, it will tell me why. And here's why, because it's not been at least 11 months. So you can only get scored once every 12 months.
Okay.
And when Molly pushes go on the application and says, boom, it's time to send the team out to certify them, you have Molly, is it a 60-day window, 90-day window? You have a period of time to get that done.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
So that once their 12-month mark hits, they would be eligible, and you keyed in on that. This is an automatic data point that, just like the score adjusts, if it's greater than 75 and it's met that criteria more than 12 months, it will actually pop up and say currently eligible.
Okay.
And I'm going to show.
But the certification does nothing except for public relations points, right? In some sense, in one sense.
So I think in some cities and areas it may be have some value, right?
Yeah, that and Energy Star portfolio manager is really good to have, because like Columbus just in the last couple years put a benchmarking ordinance in place.
Mhm.
And what they actually do is utilize these ID numbers to be able to correlate you into their database. So when Molly moves the data and runs a report to say, hey, this building has all the data up to date for the time period, boom, there's a connection, and then they get the data that they're allowed to have without, getting everything. So I was gonna show you this to answer two things, Ed. This is what it would look like. This is one of our clients,
Mhm.
and they are currently in the process of having their application reviewed.
Yep.
But this is what it would say when you hit
Yeah.
above 75 and you're eligible. I'm not going to click on it because
Yeah.
Molly's already started the application process.
Okay.
But then also, Ken, to your question from early on about adding a meter, when you add a meter in, that's where your solar data resides, in that section. And then from a month-to-month basis, you can either add it in by adding another entry or uploading an Excel file every so often through the buttons down here. And I know we've started a few minutes late and went a few minutes over. I think from looking at the questions that Zach has for us on the board, we talked about, was there something I missed? Anybody?
Just one on the solar meter there. In one sense, if you had complete net metering, okay, and your solar power was offsetting, you weren't using any of the grid power, you would come out with you could come out with a lovely score in that you're very environmentally efficient and all that. But then if you're using twice as much solar power as you should be using for the building that you have, then you're terribly inefficient. And the only way it would show up is if you feed in your solar power usage. Is that a correct statement?
Correct. So you actually have to put the amount of data or the amount of generation that the solar has, because Energy Star does an equation, because the utility is already reconciling at the meter. So if the utility says you used 100 kilowatt hours and the solar says you used 100 kilowatt hours, Energy Star is going to know you still used 200 kilowatt hours, even if they were coming from different sources.
But 100 of them were nice, clean solar and.
Yep, you classified right here, energy used on site in kilowatt hours. So then that's cataloged here. And this allows you to also be able to say whether you own the renewable energy credits. One of your questions earlier, Ken, was about irregularities in the date or in the metering. When you start looking at, there's not a lot of estimates here because we actually have the login to go and extract the data right out of the solar edge. But if I'm going to knock on wood and say we're pretty fortunate that not a lot of times do we have an estimate, but you could see that if that value was from your Duke friends estimating that the value, you would have that box checked when you did your data entry. So that's one of those things that doesn't penalize you, until you're trying to apply for Energy Star certification, and then they want to make sure that you've got accurate data.
So if you had a bill data that covered, let's say, just 2 months, and they didn't give you a, a bill in the middle, that you would basically split that in half some way or in two pieces and consider that to be an estimated number, those 2 times, those 2 months.
Well, you wouldn't have to do the math yourself. You could just simply put it in and you might have a different, and that's one of those things that, remember those big obnoxious red blocks at the top when we had an error with something?
Yeah.
Energy Star may pop that up as a yellow and say, hey, you have an irregular billing cycle compared to others or compared to, the time period expected.
Yeah.
But it allows you to be able to account for that, so you don't look back and go, gosh, why did it go from 91 to 81? Well, in this case, that was real data. Well, why did it go down to 30? Oh, hey, guess what? June and July of COVID. So, but those were their actual bills, not estimated values. All right, so I think we answered all the questions. I really appreciate everybody coming to hang out with us. I wanted to reiterate, since we largely have the same folks as last time, that you all are, we'll call you the winners of the Energility Level 1 audit. If you want to give us a phone call, we'll be happy to do a phone consult. If it makes sense to get on site, happy to work that into the equation over the next couple of weeks.
The faithful ones, that's what we are.
Yep.
No, thank you very much, Justin, and your team there, that we just see their initials, not their faces, because this has been very helpful.
Thank you, Ed.
A lot more confident setting all this up. If I get green button to flip over all of DT's information on day one, is there any way you can keep it that once they actually do generate a bill, that it can flip over automatically, or do I have to start that all becomes manual, or keep flipping it?
Yeah, as far as the green button goes,
Yeah,
that when they eventually get to that, or when they get there, that would allow you easier transferability. So when we clicked some of those things to download, some of those links to download,
right.
Basically that green button just puts it in a unique utility consistent format that's recognized. So a lot of the software providers and folks that want to try to help you with various ways to slice and dice your energy, or you see Energy Star does it, they know that format and it's recognized as,
Okay.
hey, if I got it, it'll upload and it's going to go to the right spots. Now, I will tell you that as much as stuff is formatted the right way, you still need somebody smart like Molly or Zach to be able to go through periodically, because we found that even though some of those tools are really good, formatted, really good to execute, 90% accurate is still an A in school, but it still leaves you 10% short of perfect. And especially if you're trying to, make the difference in your performance, you want to get that as accurate as you possibly can.
90% would probably be purely aspirational for DTE.
You have friends over there, don't you, Ed?
Oh, geez, they're pathetic. In fact, Ann Arbor's right now doing a study. Can they set up a municipal grid and just get rid of DTE?
Yeah.
It's just they are no, I won't even go into that. It's
that's okay. I'm just gonna close this out here by just sharing this, kind of the agenda that we had in place. I really appreciate everybody's participation, collaboration, and the conversation. So, Joanne? it looks like you're on mute, but I think you might have something to say before we leave.
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
So Molly or somebody, you or somebody sent a link to the recording of the last thing and the last one, and the recording, when I open it up, said this is private and I can't open it.
Oh, yeah, I actually put it up on our YouTube page. We have very, very few YouTube videos up there. I was waiting till we got the
second
till we got this one done, and then we can figure out what level of privacy we want to keep it versus sharing it more broadly. Because I know you all have a page that you want to be able to share it to as well, correct?
Yeah, and Geneva is our go-to person. She puts it on a YouTube channel. But I've have several people asking me if they can watch the recording because they can't be here to, at this time.
Sure.
So I don't know if you want me to only send it to people who are asking for it or open it up and just slap it on to Ken's page on our website, the working group facilities page. There's a box on the bottom of the page that says webinars, and that's where I would put it.
Okay, yeah, we'll work on those. Matter of fact, when I went to download it, it was a little clunky, and for whatever reason, it ended up saying that we hung around. I really like you all, but for some reason it was saying we hung around for 4 hours, and there was this big gap of dead video space that I had to edit out, and then it wanted to replay back. So I got all kinds of gory details that you probably don't want to hear about trying to edit video and get it to work right. So we got it, and yeah, we'll get the permissions right so you can share that in the appropriate spots, and we'll do the same for this one. So
I don't remember if I copied Geneva on the email to you, but you certainly are welcome to work with her since she works with us. She's our go-to person for that, or we go directly to Sue, who does our website.
Okay. Yeah, we'll make sure we get it set up so it can be shared as widely as we want to.
Excellent.
I appreciate all of your positive comments, and
we appreciate everything you've done, Justin. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for doing this.
You're welcome.
And Ken, thank you for setting it up.
Oh, thank you for being part of it. Appreciate it.
Yep. Much appreciated, everybody.
Okay.
Have a good evening.
Have a good one. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.